The storm had just begun to clear when Grace Rawlings spotted the broken barn for the first time, its charred beams reaching like desperate fingers toward the Wyoming sky. She pulled her mare to a stop, squinting through the remnants of rain at the sorry sight ahead, a once proud structure now half collapsed, with a tall figure hammering futilely at what remained of the roof. Wyoming Territory, 1878. Grace had been riding for 3 days straight, fleeing memories as much as she was seeking opportunity. The teaching position in Whispering Pines had beckoned like salvation after everything that had happened in Boston. She'd never imagined she'd arrive a week early with nowhere to stay, the stagecoach having made better time than expected through the mountain passes. She dismounted slowly, muscles protesting after the long journey. The man hadn't noticed her yet, too busy cursing at a stubborn beam. 2 small boys sat on a fallen log nearby, watching their father with solemn faces that seemed too serious for children so young. "Looks like you could use a hand," Grace called, her voice carrying across the muddy yard. The man spun around so quickly, he nearly lost his balance on the slippery roof. He stared down at her, hammer frozen mid-swing. His face was obscured by a week's worth of dark beard, but his eyes sharp and blue as a winter sky assessed her with undisguised suspicion. "We ain't hiring," he said gruffly, turning back to his work. Grace squared her shoulders. "I wasn't asking for employment, sir, merely offering assistance." The man paused again, longer this time. One of the little boys, couldn't be more than 5, tugged at his brother's sleeve and whispered something that made the older one nod vigorously. "Pa," called the older boy, who looked around 7. "She might be able to help. You said yourself you can't do it alone." The man, their father, sighed deeply, his broad shoulders slumping with exhaustion. He made his way carefully down what remained of the ladder, jumping the last few feet to land with a splash in the mud. Up close, Grace could see the exhaustion etched into every line of his face. "Wade Xanders," he said finally, extending a calloused hand. "And those 2 troublemakers are my sons, Samuel and Joseph." Grace shook his hand firmly. "Grace Rawlings. I'm the new school teacher for Whispering Pines." She glanced around at the devastation surrounding them. "What happened here?" Wade's jaw tightened. "Lightning strike 3 nights ago. Lost nearly everything except the house, by some miracle." He gestured vaguely toward a modest cabin some 50 yards away. "Been trying to salvage what I can of the barn before the next storm hits. Can't afford to lose my remaining livestock." The boys had edged closer now, eyeing her with undisguised curiosity. The younger one, Joseph, clutched a small wooden horse that had clearly been loved nearly to pieces. "You really a teacher, madam?" asked Samuel, the older boy. Grace smiled. "I really am, or will be once school starts next week." "You know how to read?" Joseph piped up, eyes wide. "I do indeed, and write and calculate sums and many other things I'll be teaching you both, I suspect." Wade cleared his throat. "Town's still 5 miles east." "Don't mean to be rude, but what brings you out this way?" Grace turned her attention back to him. "The stagecoach made better time than expected. I'm early by a week, and the boarding house isn't ready for me. The driver mentioned there might be farms along this route where I could find temporary lodging." Something flickered across Wade's face, hesitation, perhaps, or simple wariness. A widower alone with 2 young sons couldn't be too careful about his reputation. "We have a spare room," Samuel offered eagerly. "Ma's room. Nobody uses it now." Wade flinched visibly, and Grace immediately understood. The boys had lost their mother, and recently enough that the wound was still raw. "Samuel," Wade said quietly, "that's not for you to offer." Grace touched the brim of her hat. "I've imposed enough. I should continue on toward town. Perhaps someone there can suggest accommodation." She turned to remount her horse, but Joseph suddenly darted forward. Please don't go." His small hand clutched at her skirts. "Pa can't fix the barn alone, and the cows need shelter, and Joseph," Wade warned. "And Pa hasn't slept proper since Ma died and the storm came, and that's enough." Wade's voice was firm but not unkind as he gently pulled his youngest away from Grace. "I apologize, Miss Rawlings. My boys forget their manners." Grace looked from the desperate, tired face of the man to the hopeful expressions of his sons. Then she glanced at the darkening sky to the west. Another storm was brewing. "Mr. Xanders," she said decisively, "I propose a trade. I help you rebuild your barn, and you provide me lodging until the boarding house is ready. I'm stronger than I look, and I grew up on a farm in Massachusetts. I know my way around tools." Wade's eyebrows rose in surprise. "It's not proper work for a lady, especially a schoolteacher." Grace laughed. "Propriety won't keep your cattle dry, Mr. Xanders, and I assure you I've never much cared what others consider proper work for a lady." For the first time, a ghost of a smile tugged at Wade's lips. "No, I don't imagine you have." He looked at the half-collapsed barn, then at his sons, then back at Grace. "1 week, until your boarding house is ready," Grace nodded. "All right then, Miss Rawlings. We have a deal." He extended his hand again, and this time when their palms met, Grace felt a curious warmth spread up her arm. The boys whooped with delight, and even Wade's serious expression lightened momentarily. Grace wondered how long it had been since he'd smiled properly. "First things first," she said briskly, unbuttoning her travel coat. "Let's salvage what we can before that next storm hits." It took them until dusk to secure what remained of the barn structure. Grace worked alongside Wade, holding beams steady while he hammered, passing tools, and even climbing up to the half-destroyed loft to throw down hay that could still be saved. The boys helped too, in their way fetching nails, bringing water, and warning when certain timbers looked ready to give way. By the time they trudged back to the cabin, Grace was filthy, exhausted, and oddly exhilarated. It had been years since she'd worked with her hands this way, not since leaving her father's farm to attend teaching college. The cabin was modest but neat. 3 rooms, a main living area with a kitchen and stone fireplace, and 2 small bedrooms. As Samuel had mentioned, one clearly hadn't been used in some time. A fine layer of dust covered the quilt on the bed, and a woman's hairbrush still sat on a small table by the window. "It was Lucy's," Wade said quietly from the doorway, startling Grace. "My wife's. I should have cleared her things, made it more proper for a guest, but I haven't been able to bring myself to." "Please," Grace interrupted gently. "Don't apologize, I understand." She did understand, perhaps better than he knew. She'd lost people too. Wade nodded, gratitude flashing in his eyes. "Boys and I will give you privacy to settle in. Supper in half an hour. It's just beans and biscuits, I'm afraid. Lucy was the cook in the family." "Beans and biscuits sound wonderful," Grace assured him. "And tomorrow, perhaps I'll try my hand at cooking for us all." After he left, Grace carefully moved the hairbrush to the dresser drawer, treating it with the reverence due to a precious memory. Then she washed with water from the pitcher, changed into her one spare dress, and joined the small family for their evening meal. The next morning dawned clear but cool, autumn announcing its imminent arrival on the western wind. Grace rose early, determined to prove her worth. By the time Wade and the boys emerged from their room, she had coffee brewing, flapjacks cooking on the stove, and had already drawn water from the well for washing. Wade stopped short when he entered the kitchen, his expression somewhere between surprise and suspicion. "You didn't have to do all this. I believe in earning my keep, Mr. Xanders." "Wade," he corrected. "If you're staying here and helping rebuild my barn, you might as well use my given name." "Wade," she agreed with a nod, And I'm Grace." The boys tumbled in behind their father, sniffing the air appreciatively. "Flapjacks," Samuel exclaimed. "Pa only knows how to make them burned on the outside and raw in the middle." Wade cuffed his son lightly on the shoulder, but there was affection in the gesture. "Show some respect, boy." "I've kept you fed, haven't I?" Joseph climbed onto a chair, eyes wide. "Are you going to stay forever, Miss Grace? Pa can't cook and neither can we." An awkward silence fell. Grace busied herself flipping the flapjacks while Wade poured coffee with excessive concentration. "Miss Grace has her teaching position in town," Wade finally said. "She's just helping us until her lodgings are ready." Something in his tone made Grace glance up. For the briefest moment, their eyes met, and she glimpsed something vulnerable beneath his gruff exterior. Then he looked away, and the moment passed. They set to work on the barn immediately after breakfast. The damage was extensive, but not irreparable. The framework of the western wall remained intact, giving them something solid to build from. Wade had lumber he'd been planning to expand the barn before winter, and Grace proved she hadn't been exaggerating her capabilities. She wielded a hammer with precision, measured and cut boards without wasting a single piece, and knew instinctively how to brace a joint for maximum strength. By midday, they'd made remarkable progress. "Where did you learn all this?" Wade asked during a brief water break. The boys had wandered off to check on the chickens. Leaving the adults alone, Grace wiped sweat from her brow, leaving a smudge of dirt. "My father had no sons. He taught me everything he would have taught a boy: building, hunting, even tracking. My mother was scandalized, but she couldn't deny it was useful." "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was," Grace said softly. "He died 3 years ago, pneumonia." Wade nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Lucy, my wife, it was childbirth fever. Almost 2 years ago now. The baby didn't survive either." Grace's heart constricted at the raw pain in his voice. "I'm so sorry, Wade." He stared out at the distant mountains. "The boys have been my salvation. Had to keep going for them. But it's been—" He trailed off, seemingly embarrassed by his own vulnerability. "Hard," Grace finished for him. "Lonely, like half of yourself is missing." Wade's gaze snapped to her face. "Yes, exactly like that." A shout from Samuel interrupted the moment. The boys came running back, excited about a nest of kittens they'd discovered in the remaining hay. The work resumed, but something had shifted between Grace and Wade. A recognition, perhaps. A kinship born of shared grief. As the days passed, they fell into an easy rhythm. Mornings were for cooking and chores around the house. Then they worked on the barn until sundown, stopping only for a quick midday meal. In the evenings, after the boys were in bed, Grace and Wade would sit by the fireplace, planning the next day's work or sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence. On the third day, they raised the new roof beams. It was dangerous, exhausting work, but when the last one was secured, Wade let out a whoop of triumph that made Grace laugh out loud. The boys, who had been watching wide-eyed from a safe distance, ran in circles around them, celebrating as if it were Christmas morning. That night, Wade played his harmonica while the boys taught Grace a clapping game. For the first time since her arrival, the cabin felt truly alive with something other than grief and worry. On the fourth day, disaster nearly struck. Grace was up on the newly constructed roof, nailing down shingles when a board gave way beneath her. She felt herself falling. A scream caught in her throat, and then strong arms were around her, breaking her fall. Wade had been working directly below and caught her as she tumbled. They crashed to the ground together, Wade taking the brunt of the impact. For a terrifying moment, neither moved. The boys came running, shouting in panic. "Pa, Miss Grace, are you dead?" Wade groaned, then chuckled weakly. "Not dead, boys, just winded." He shifted slightly beneath Grace. "You all right, Miss Rawlings?" Grace realized she was sprawled across his chest, their faces inches apart. His eyes were even bluer up close, flecked with gray like storm clouds. "Yes," she whispered. "Thanks to you." Neither moved immediately. Something electric passed between them, a current of awareness that had nothing to do with their precarious work and everything to do with the man and woman they were beneath their roles. "Miss Grace is squishing Pa," Joseph announced, breaking the spell. Grace scrambled up quickly, brushing dirt from her clothes to hide her flushed cheeks. Wade rose more slowly, wincing slightly. "You're hurt," she said with concern. "Just bruised my pride," he assured her, though she noticed he favored his left side for the rest of the day. That evening, Grace insisted on examining his ribs despite his protests. "I've wrapped plenty of injuries on the farm," she told him firmly. "Either you let me look, or I'll ride for the doctor tomorrow instead of working on the barn." Grudgingly, Wade sat at the kitchen table and removed his shirt. Grace tried to maintain professional detachment as she examined his torso, but it was impossible not to notice the hard planes of muscle beneath her fingers, or the way his breath caught when she found the tender spots along his rib cage. "Nothing broken," she declared, stepping back. "But you'll be sore for days." "Worth it," Wade said quietly, "if I hadn't caught you." The unfinished thought hung between them. Grace busied herself preparing a poultice of herbs she'd found growing near the well. Neither spoke of the moment on the ground, or the current that still seemed to flow between them whenever their eyes met. On the 5th day, a visitor arrived. Sheriff Thomas Blackburn from Whispering Pines came riding up just as they were breaking for lunch. He tipped his hat to Grace, but his expression was troubled. "Miss Rawlings, there's been some talk in town about your situation here." Grace felt Wade stiffen beside her. The boys, sensing tension, crept closer to their father. "My situation," Grace kept her voice even. "A single woman staying with a widower and his children. It's causing concern among some of the more traditional townsfolk, particularly the school board members." "I see." Grace's stomach knotted with familiar dread. She'd faced similar prejudice before. It was part of why she'd left Boston. Wade stepped forward. "Sheriff, Miss Rawlings has been helping rebuild my barn after the lightning strike. She needed temporary lodging until the boarding house was ready. There's nothing improper happening here." The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "I understand that, Wade. But perception matters, especially for a schoolteacher." "So what exactly are you suggesting?" Grace asked, anger beginning to simmer beneath her calm exterior. "The boarding house room is ready now. Mrs. Peterson sent me to let you know. She's expecting you this afternoon. 2 days early." Grace glanced at the barn. They'd made remarkable progress, but it was far from finished. The cattle were still housed in a makeshift pen that wouldn't withstand another serious storm. "I gave my word to help finish this barn," Grace said firmly. "I won't go back on it because of gossip." "Miss Rawlings," the sheriff began. "No," Wade's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "She's right. This is my fault. I should have considered how it would look." He turned to Grace, his expression grave. "Your reputation is more important than my barn, Miss Rawlings. The boys and I will manage." Grace wanted to argue, but the resignation in Wade's eyes stopped her. He was protecting her, she realized, protecting her position in the community before she'd even properly joined it. "Very well," she said finally. "I'll gather my things." The boys protested loudly, but Wade silenced them with a look. As Grace packed her meager belongings, she could hear him outside, thanking the sheriff for his concern in a tone that suggested anything but gratitude. When the time came to leave, the boys clung to her skirts, unashamed of their tears. "You promised to teach me to read," Joseph sobbed. "And I will," Grace assured him, kneeling to his level. "In school very soon." Samuel, trying to be brave, just nodded stiffly. "We'll finish the barn for you, Miss Grace. So when you come back to visit, it'll be all done." Grace's throat tightened. "I'd like that very much." Wade stood awkwardly by his horse, which he'd insisted on saddling to escort her to town. Their goodbye was stilted, formal, nothing like the easy companionship they'd developed over the past days. "Thank you for your help, Miss Rawlings. Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Xanders." And that was it. They rode to town in near silence, the sheriff a few paces ahead, effectively chaperoning them. When they reached the boarding house, Wade tipped his hat and turned to leave immediately. "Wade," Grace called impulsively. He paused, looking back. "The barn," she began. "Don't worry about the barn," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Like Samuel said, it'll be waiting when you come to visit." But they both knew the constraints of propriety would make such visits nearly impossible. Life in Whispering Pines settled into a routine. Grace began teaching at the small schoolhouse, quickly winning over her students with her kind but firm approach. Samuel and Joseph were among her brightest pupils, though she was careful not to show them special favor. Wade rarely came to town. When he did, their interactions were polite but distant. He would tip his hat, ask about the boys' progress, and move on quickly. Each time, Grace felt a peculiar ache in her chest that lingered long after he'd ridden away. 2 weeks after starting her teaching position, Grace was shopping at the general store when she overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. "Xanders is losing that farm for sure now," said a gruff voice she recognized as belonging to the banker, Harold Williams. "Storm destroyed most of his barn, and with winter coming, he can't keep livestock without proper shelter. Shame about those boys, but a man needs to pay his debts." Grace moved closer, pretending to examine a shelf of canned goods. "Thought he had until spring to settle up," said the store owner. "That was before the storm. Can't make exceptions for bad luck, Tom. Business is business." Grace's mind raced. Wade had never mentioned financial troubles, but it explained his desperation to rebuild quickly. His exhaustion, the worry that sometimes creased his brow when he thought no one was looking. That evening, Grace made a decision that flew in the face of propriety, reputation, and common sense. She waited until after dark, borrowed a horse from the livery stable owner, who owed her a favor after she'd taught his daughter to write her name, and rode out to the Xanders farm. The cabin was dark except for a faint glow from the fireplace visible through the window. Grace hesitated only briefly before knocking firmly on the door. Long moments passed. Finally, the door swung open to reveal Wade, hair tousled, expression shifting from wariness to shock when he recognized her. "Grace, what in God's name? I need to speak with you," she interrupted. "It's important." He glanced around anxiously as if expecting to find the entire town watching. "You shouldn't be here. If anyone saw, no one saw me. Please, Wade, 5 minutes." Reluctantly, he stepped back, allowing her inside. The cabin was much as she remembered, though perhaps a little less tidy. The boys were asleep, she realized, their soft breathing audible from the bedroom. "What's this about?" Wade asked, keeping his distance. "The bank is foreclosing on your farm," Grace said without preamble. "Because of the storm damage." Wade's face darkened. "Been busy gathering gossip in town, have you?" "No," she said, stung by his tone. "I overheard Williams talking. Why didn't you tell me the situation was so dire it wasn't your concern?" He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Still isn't. The boys are my students. That makes their welfare my concern." Grace took a steadying breath. "And you matter to me, Wade. I want to help." His expression softened marginally. "There's nothing to be done. I'm behind on the loan payments. The storm was just the final blow." "We can finish the barn," Grace insisted. "I've been thinking about it ever since I left. With the barn complete, you can shelter your livestock through winter, maybe even increase your herd come spring. And how exactly do you propose to help without ruining your reputation? The town already talked when you were here 5 days. What do you think they'll say if you start showing up regularly to swing a hammer?" Grace lifted her chin. "I don't care what they say." "Well, you should," Wade snapped. "Your position can be damned," Grace said fiercely. "I left Boston because I was tired of living by other people's rules and judgments. I won't make the same mistake here." Wade stared at her, clearly torn between hope and doubt. "Why would you risk everything for us?" "For me," the question hung in the air between them. Grace couldn't find the words to express what had grown in her heart during those few days of shared work and quiet evenings. How the boys had filled a void she hadn't realized existed. How Wade's rare smiles made her feel more alive than she had in years. "Because," she said simply, "in 5 days, you and the boys became more important to me than anything else." Wade closed the distance between them in 2 strides. His hands came up to frame her face, calloused palms gentle against her skin. "Grace," he whispered, her name a question and an answer all at once. Their first kiss was tentative, a mere brushing of lips. The second was not. Years of loneliness and longing poured out as they clung to each other in the firelight. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. "We'll never hear the end of it," Wade murmured, his forehead resting against hers. "A respectable schoolteacher and a failing farmer," Grace smiled. "Then we'd better make sure you're not failing anymore." The next day, Grace marched into the bank and withdrew nearly all her savings money she'd been carefully hoarding since her father's death. She placed it on Harold Williams' desk with unwavering confidence. "This should cover Mr. Xanders' immediate debt," she announced. "He'll pay the rest on schedule once his farm is producing properly again." Williams sputtered indignantly. "Miss Rawlings, this is most irregular." "A woman involving herself in a man's financial affairs is becoming increasingly common in the more civilized parts of our country," Grace finished smoothly. "Now, shall we discuss interest rates, or would you prefer I take my business elsewhere?" By mid-afternoon, the entire town knew what she'd done. By evening, the school board had called an emergency meeting. Grace attended with her head held high, prepared for dismissal. Instead, something unexpected happened. The mothers of her students spoke up one by one, praising her teaching methods, her dedication, her positive influence on their children. Even the pastor's wife, previously one of her harshest critics, stood to speak. "Judge not, lest ye be judged," she quoted firmly. "Miss Rawlings has shown Christian charity to a struggling family. I see nothing shameful in that." The board voted to retain her, with only a mild warning about maintaining appropriate appearances. It wasn't unconditional acceptance, but it was a start. The next day was Saturday. Grace arrived at the Xanders farm at dawn, wearing her oldest dress and carrying tools she'd purchased in town. Wade and the boys were waiting, hope shining in their eyes. "The town knows everything," she told Wade as they walked toward the half-finished barn, "and I still have my position." Relief washed over his features. "How?" Grace smiled. "It seems I've made some allies, and it seems your neighbors might be more understanding than we thought." As if to prove her point, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Coming up the road was a procession of wagons and riders, at least a dozen men from surrounding farms, along with their older sons. Each wagon was loaded with lumber, tools, or food. "Heard you could use a hand, Xanders," called the lead rider, a grizzled farmer named Peterson. Figured a barn raising was in order. Wade stood speechless as the men dismounted and began unloading. Grace squeezed his hand. "You're not alone anymore," she whispered. "Neither of us is." The barn was completed by sundown. What would have taken weeks of solitary labor was accomplished in a single day with many hands working together. The women who had accompanied their husbands provided a feast that stretched across 3 tables hastily assembled in the yard. Children played, men laughed and shared stories, and for the first time since Lucy's death, the Xanders farm felt alive with community. As the last of the neighbors departed, Wade found Grace sitting on the porch steps, watching the sunset paint the new barn in shades of gold. The boys had finally collapsed into exhausted sleep after the excitement of the day. "I don't know how to thank you," Wade said, lowering himself beside her. Grace leaned against his shoulder. "You don't need to." "Yes, I do." He took her hand, turning it over to trace the new blisters on her palm. "You saved more than the farm today. You saved us. Me." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Wade cleared his throat nervously. "I know it's too soon. We've known each other less than a month. But I've never been more certain of anything in my life." He shifted to face her directly. "Grace Rawlings, I'm in love with you. The boys adore you. And if you'd consider becoming part of this family officially," Grace placed her fingers against his lips. "Yes," she said simply. "I haven't even asked properly yet," he protested with a laugh. "Then ask," she challenged, eyes bright with unshed tears. Wade slid off the step to kneel before her, still holding her hand. "Grace Rawlings, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife, of being a mother to my boys, of building a life with me one day at a time, just like we built that barn?" Grace pulled him to her, kissing him thoroughly before answering. "Yes, Wade Xanders, one board at a time, one day at a time. Yes." They were married 3 weeks later in the newly completed barn, decorated with autumn wildflowers and lit by dozens of lanterns. The entire town attended, previous gossip forgotten in the face of such obvious happiness. Samuel and Joseph stood proudly beside their father, dressed in new suits Grace had helped them pick out. As they spoke their vows, Grace looked around at the sturdy walls surrounding them, walls she had helped build with her own hands. They would weather many storms in this life together, she knew. But they would face them the way they had faced rebuilding the barn. Together, one challenge at a time, with determination and love. "I promise," she whispered as Wade slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, "to build our life together with the same care we put into this barn. Strong enough to withstand any storm, open enough to welcome all who need shelter." Wade's eyes glistened in the lantern light. "And I promise to stand beside you through it all, grateful every day that a storm brought you to us when we needed you most." As winter settled over the Wyoming Territory, the Xanders farm flourished. The new barn housed healthy livestock, the cabin rang with laughter, and in the evenings, Grace would sit by the fire, teaching all 3 of her men something new each day. Sometimes it was reading or arithmetic. Other times it was patience, forgiveness, or the simple joy of belonging. And when spring came, bringing new life to the land, it brought new life to the family as well, the promise of a child, a sister or brother for Samuel and Joseph. Another heart to fill the home that Grace and Wade had rebuilt together, one board and one day at a time.